Hey, today we'll be talking about the Lee-Enfield rifles, which were standard British rifles used in the First and the Second World War. The Lee-Enfield was a development from the Lee-Metford rifle, which again was a development which followed from the Martina Henry. There are a lot of rifles and a lot of variants, so we'll be talking mainly about the more well-known ones today. So the issue was that in 1895 the Lee-Enfield was adopted. It included a bolt which was designed. This is not a Lee-Enfield. This is another rifle. But the Lee-Enfield developed from the Lee-Metford rifle. And the Lee-Metford rifle included a bolt with a rear locking mechanism designed by James Paris Lee. And it had rifling in the barrel, which was rounded type of rifling developed by William Metford. And these two together were the key elements in the design of this rifle, with a barrel, bolt, and a magazine. And it took these cartridges with ball ammunition. However, the experience with the rifle showed that better rounds would be more effective at longer range. The ball ammunition tended not to perform as well as Mauser Spitzer bullets in conflicts where the Mauser rifles were encountered. So the British, following in with other countries, wanted to develop a high-performance, long-range infantryman bullet. And this was the 303 British surface round, which was included, they developed the pointed bullet and the smokeless powder. However, when these were tried to be used in the Lee-Enfield design with its rounded Metford rifling, it was found that this rifling tended to wear out after about 6,000 rounds. So they looked to develop a new rifle, and the rifle that was developed eventually is this one. This is a short magazine Lee-Enfield. So short because it's shorter than the Lee-Enfield. It's actually intermediate in length between the Lee-Enfield, which is a longer rifle, and some of the cavalry carbines of the time, which were shorter and which were considered to have too much recoil. So this was, in a way, sort of a balance. It was short, in the sense it was shorter than the Lee-Enfield. It was still quite a long rifle, as you can see. It's not a carbine. It had a magazine. This is the 10-round magazine, which could be removed from the rifle, but it was not usually removed from the rifle. It was intended to be loaded from above. There was some concern that the magazine could be lost. In fact, many of them in the early versions even had a chain attaching them to the rifle. But the rifle was loaded from above. As you pull the bolt back, this is the charger guide, which you had these 5 303 standard rounds on a stripper clip, and they would be pushed into the magazine from above using this bolt-mounted, quite unusual, bolt-mounted charger guide to guide the clip into the magazine. You put 5 rounds and 5 rounds, and then you would obviously close the rifle, and it would load the first cartridge and cock. You also, so the major features of the rifle were the magazine, which was loaded with this charger clip. I'll talk about other things about the magazine later, but let's talk also about the bolt. This was designed by James Paris Lee, and this is basically a rare locking bolt. So this is a bolt which, when you open the bolt, it does not cock the striker as it does, as happens in the Mauser rifles, which makes it very easy to open and obviously eject the spent cartridge. It actually cocks on closing, so as you close, the lugs, which are helical, start to engage, and you have to press to cock, to close it and cock. And it will, the actual head space is only achieved when you close down the bolt, which is different from other rifles. So this was the James Paris Lee bolt design. So it's a bolt which cocks on closing. I'm going to press the trigger so I don't cock it as I close it. What other features did the rifle have? Many of them. This is the SMLE. Later it was called the number 1 when the number 3 was introduced. We'll talk about that later. What the features did it have? So the bolt, charger guide, but it also had this attachment here, which I'm finding difficult to operate because my hand is on the other side. So what this is, it's a magazine cutoff. As you close it, it stops rounds being loaded from the magazine. What's the purpose of that? Because it was considered in moving from rifles which were loading single shots or maybe with smaller magazines, there was a fear that the infantryman would overuse his ammunition, go into panic and basically fire out these rounds indiscriminately. So there was a discipline where the order would be given and the magazine would be cut off so that you would shoot single rounds, loading them one by one, even though you had a full magazine with 9 or 10 rounds. However, with the magazine, you could, and with stripper clips handy, a competent rifleman could be able to actually quickly cycle rounds and fire them off to perform what was known as the mad minute. In other words, firing off 30 or 40, I think the world record was about 38 or more, 20, 30 rounds in a minute, where you were, firing one round after the other and then loading the magazine with the clips and then firing off again. And these were aimed shots, so it was technically possible to achieve a very high rate of fire with this rifle. There are some other features which which are worthy of note in my opinion. You have the rear sight, which is different from later models. And it had these bone or pearl knobs for adjusting the range adjustment, and you also had a windage adjustment, and this is the rear sight. The front sight obviously is there. At the front we'll talk about the attachments there. But I will also show you, and I hope it will appear later in close-up in the video. Also this interesting arrangement where you had another sight. You had the rear sight here, the one which was standard, which was graduated from 200 yards to 2,000 yards. It was a bit enthusiastic. But then you had the volley sights, they were called. So you actually extended this arm with a peep hole here. And the stock of the rifle, you had this second sight, which was like a knob on a lever, which is circles, and it moves in a circle, and there are graduations. And basically, by setting it to a range up to over 2,800 yards, you can actually, lining up the rear sight and the front volley sight, actually raise the rifle up to an angle where you can fire rounds out to 2,800 yards. Now, this was only used for firing at groups of soldiers. So the idea is you would have a formation of soldiers with the volley sights firing relatively aimed fire at a very long distance at a collection or a group of soldiers. Other features of the rifle. This sling here is quite unusual because this sling is not similar to the other slings you see in the First World War for the 1907 onwards, the number 3 rifle. It's a sling which at the back is secured with a bow tie in a leather strand which was tied in a bow tie. These were later withdrawn, these slings. They're quite rare to find. I'm fortunate to have 2 of them. And finally, here you have the bayonet attachment at the front. And the characteristic of the SMLE was this snub nose. The barrel reaches to the end of the stock, and there's this mounting for the rear sight, but also the reinforcement for attaching for stabilizing the bayonet. The lug is here, and you had this stud here in front of the barrel, the only thing that protrudes further than the barrel for securing the bayonet. You also had it looks like a sling swivel, but actually it's there for stacking. You would put 3 rifles together, link them together, and they would stand as like a tripod. But you have this attachment, which is also quite unusual. This is a wire cutter, and these were introduced in various variants during the war. The intention was for soldiers with these rifles to basically push these down onto the barbed wire, and by pressing this would turn, and basically the blades would come together and cut the barbed wire, which would allow the soldiers to cut through barbed wire and continue to advance. This was found to be suicidal, because soldiers that attempted to do this would be cut down by machine gun fire, and in fact these were also withdrawn later. But this gun is practically complete with all of the accessories one would like it to have. Okay, thank you for following. This is not the end of this video, but it's rather long, so we're splitting it into 2 halves. This is the end of part 1, and we'll now continue with the SMLA number 3.